Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Hey,
So thank you. Please excuse me. So we're talking about the incident where Noah comes off the ark and he plants a vineyard and he drinks the wine and he becomes drunk and he exposes himself. And we're commenting on the effects of wine. And of course, wine is delightful, but if you don't apply it properly, then it becomes a source of great concern, right? And sadness. So here we are on this verse 21. Vayesht min hayayin, he drank from the wine. Vayishkar, and he became drunk. Excuse me, so sorry. Let me just hold on a second. Okay, forgive me. All right. So let's take a look, right? And going on in Vayitgal, and he exposed himself betoch oholo in his tent, in his tent. So here we go. Vayishkar. He became drunk. There's an English word, I think, shikker, right? I think it's used meaning drunk, maybe not popular anymore, but I think it actually existed as part of English vocab. Tanya. So Tanya, of course, refers to a source that is prior to the year 200. Rabbi Meir Omer. Rabbi Meir is one of the great rabbis of that period. Ilan, the tree, she'achal mimenu Adam harishon, from which Adam ate. Gefen haya, it was a vine. And we learned this the last time we did Torah T'mimah from a previous statement from which we learned a statement that meant that he actually that these words vai, right? All these vai, yachel, etc., imply that it teaches that he should have learned, and also it says ish adama, from that statement, ish adama, forgive me, and refer to Adam, and how Adam, he should have learned, that Noah should have learned from Adam, and the implication that Adam drank from the grape, and that means, of course, that that tree of knowledge was in fact a grapevine. But here we learn it directly. Okay, here we learn it directly. Because there is nothing like wine that brings woe, right? Statements of woe to a person, right? Sadness. Shne'emar, as it says here, Vayesh min hayayin, he drank of the wine, Vayishkar, and he became drunk. So here we are. Hatam bazeh. So the reason behind, let me make sure, sorry, let me find the right place. Yein mashikatuv badrasha kodemet. So he's saying, Torah T'mimah is telling us, if you look at what happened in his previous comment, where it's about Ish HaAdamah, and the Ish HaAdamah is a reference to Adam, right? So he says, take a look at that. Just compare that to what we're reading now. V'yesh leosif od, and it's worth adding, by the way, to Rabbi Meir, that the reason why we have Rabbi Meir Darish Kane, that the reason why Rabbi Meir is the one who says that that tree of knowledge of good and evil was a grapevine, right? Because there are other theories as to what it was. There's a theory that it was a fig tree. That's because it says God took fig leaves to cover up their nakedness back there in the story of Genesis. So why? Okay. B'yachas atzmo. Why did he say that? Because he was thinking about his own life, something that happened to him. Alpi, by means hatakala she'iralo. The takala means sort of an offense, a predicament, something that tripped him up. Right? He wound up in a situation that was a bad situation, and it happened to him. Al Yedei. And how did this happen? Shehich shiluhu b'shtiyat yain rav. It sounds to me here, because I'm not familiar with the actual incident itself, but they gave him too much wine to drink, to Rabbi Meir. And Torah T'mimah gives us a reference, Kemuva Beseder Hadorot Betoldato. So there is a book called Seder Hadorot, which quite possibly talks about the various rabbis and their generations, right? Seder Hadorot literally means the order of the generations, but I assume these are brief biographies of various rabbis, okay? And in Betoldato means in the story about him. In the reference to Rabbi Meir, they talk about this particular um, happening in his life. V'lachein hora da'at, and for the hora da'at, and for this reason, he provided information. He wanted to give information, et ha'am, people. He from his own mistake, his own experience, he wanted to provide information to the people. Lihishamer mipach yakush there, to guide themselves from this. Literally, pach is a trap, yakush is a fowler, a bird catcher. Zeh. So in other words, and this pach yakush is a reference, if I'm not mistaken, to Psalm 91. It talks about how God will protect a person mipach yakush. It's a biblical reference, but essentially it means getting trapped. And of course, that's the thing. You could compare wine and alcohol and the effects of alcohol if you drink too much, that it catches you. Umatzinu kama mechazal. And in fact, we find a number of our rabbis of blessed memory, shedarshu inyanim, that they make drush like this, right? That's an interpretation like this. Al pi hayachas, on account of, because of its reference, v'hamikrim, and the circumstances, shekaru lahem be'atzmam, that they themselves went through. In other words, they're sharing the wisdom that they gave from a personal experience. And I love to say that the word experience really means making a mistake. And that experience is learning from your mistakes. That's essentially what experience is. So, all right, let's go on. We'll read a little bit more from the text itself, sir, right? Vayar Cham Aviknan, and Cham, Ham, the father of Canaan, et ervat aviv, he saw the nakedness of his father. Vayaged lishnei achiv bachutz, and he mentioned it he told his two brothers outside. Let's go on, outside of the tent. Vayikach Shem vayefet et hasimla, so Shem and Japheth took the cloth, the sheet, V'yasimu al shchem shnehem, and they placed it on both their shoulders, this large cloth. Vayilchu acharonanit, and they went backwards. They took backward steps. Vayachasu et ervat avihem, and they covered up the nakedness of their father. Ufnehem achoranit, their faces were turned backwards, ve'arvat avihem lora'u, so that they did not gaze, they did not see the nakedness of their father. Interesting from a literary point of view, this is not the first time we're talking about the type of something called nakedness, right? Because we know that after eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that was the moment when Adam and Eve realized they were naked. And the idea of nakedness, if you think about it, it's an emotional, spiritual sense. It's an interesting element to the human experience, the idea of being exposed and the sense of shame that we're capable of having. So here we are, we have another story now about the issue of nakedness, and obviously it has to do with sexuality, and of course the interesting element that sexuality on the one hand allows us to procreate and to survive, and on the other hand we also know that sexuality can bring deep shame and humiliation and psychological problems to people. David, yes.
Yeah. So okay. So I mean, a couple things, and maybe that this goes deeper too, but but basically, they are his sons. So, but they're walking backwards, obviously, not to see, right, not to look.
Right.
So is the reason. Because I mean, just him being naked isn't by itself a horrible thing, right? I mean, so what about his being naked actually, especially since they're males and his family members, requires them, or causes them to walk backwards so they don't see. I'm assuming that's why they walk backwards, to put it over him so
That is
that they,
correct. That's right.
yeah. So what is causing, so why did they have to do that? Again, they're his family members, they're males, so that kind of wipes out a couple of the taboos here, associated with it. So yeah, that's, and is it really because there's a, yeah, well, anyway, I don't want to go there yet.
No, no, it's
That's
a
my
great,
base.
it's a great question. If in fact we deeply believe that this world is a manifestation of the divine, you wouldn't, even if, even though you're a male, you would not present yourself to the king naked. In other words, there is something impudent about exposing yourself in a impudent, sort of in an in-your-face kind of way. We know that when we see exposure, whether it's male or female, it puts certain feelings and certain emotions into us. But also the fact that there's a very strong value within Judaism about being modest. Remember, it's one of the three things Micah says that God requires of us, right? To, um, you know, I'm trying to think of all the three, right? But so, hmm, I'm trying to think. But one of them is Hatznei Lechet, meaning to act modestly. And so that's the idea of modesty. And regardless, you don't want to sort of intentionally expose yourself. We'll actually look at this a little bit more, as because I think a lot of it has to do with the deep emotional feelings. Even if you're related, okay, if you don't make sure that you're in the right frame of mind, it can be really problematic. So let's I mean your questions are really wonderful and they go into the heart of the matter, but I really believe it has to do with the way in which we act out and make a reality of the divine presence in this world by trying to be modest and not expose our genitalia. Okay?
Well, yeah, no, and I agree. And just one more follow up to that.
Sure. Oh yeah.
With Adam and Eve, like you said,
Yes.
when they finally realized they were naked. But
Yes.
prior to that, there
Yes.
wasn't any, there wasn't any shame. There
No, there
wasn't,
was none. There was none.
right, to for them being naked, right?
Correct.
So
There was none. And the okay, so these are complicated things, but remember, prior to the eating of tree of knowledge of good and evil, they were immortal.
okay,
So there'd be no need to procreate.
procreate. Okay, got it. So there's no, right. Okay. So got it. So that now that makes sense. Okay. All right. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. I mean, it's not okay, it's not that simple,
I
and
know.
more than one way to sort of understand the text, okay? Because obviously animals procreate without a sense of shame. They have, and dogs especially have no sense of shame, by the way, okay? But animals in general don't associate that with procreation. They don't they don't have a sense of shame in that regard.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, let's take a look at this. So the Ervat Avihem, the nakedness of their father. Amar Rav Yehuda, said Rav Yehuda. So Rav Yehuda is going to be later than the year 200. He's what is known as an Amora. That's the kind of teacher he is. These are teachers that are basically from the Talmudic period after the year 200. Oved Kochavim, an idolater. arum, who is naked, if an idolater is naked, asur likrot kriyat shema kenegdo. It is forbidden to recite the Shema, right? To perform the mitzvah of the recitation of the Shema. Remember, we're supposed to recite the Shema twice a day, right? You're not allowed to do it in its presence. If you have any human being, but we're talking here about a non-Jew, especially in particular, that's one way in which they refer to a non-Jew as an Oved Kochavim. It's, not necessarily the most complimentary way, but regardless, we'll see, because the Torah T'mimah really does, I think, a really good job here of trying to narrow down what this is talking about and its background in terms of trying to understand this halacha. But you're not. So, for example, if you're naked, you yourself are naked. You shouldn't be reciting the Shema. But it's saying that even a non-Jew, if they're naked, you don't recite the Shema, because reciting the Shema is a very holy act, and it is one in which you are basically declaring your loyalty to the divine. Okay. Salkadatcha amina. So this is a Talmudic logical expression, which means you might think erroneously, right? Salkadatcha, right, means it might come up in your mind. Amina, I will say. So, but basically what it means is you might say erroneously or think erroneously. Kevan, since dichtiv boho, that with regards to non-Jews or to idolaters, it states, and this is a quote from Ezekiel chapter 23, Asher basar chamorim besaram. It says, the flesh of donkeys is their flesh. Troubling verse, let's be honest about it, but there it is. It is in Ezekiel. So it's like Ezekiel is saying that there's something unique about the way those people behave, and he's using this expression to describe it. Again, we got to hold our horses and give the Torah T'mimah a chance to explain. Ema, I would say, kechamor ba'almahu. If you're going to consider then that since it says their flesh, right, is the flesh of donkeys, then they're a donkey. It's like a donkey, right? And can you recite the Shema if you're in the presence of a donkey? Absolutely. If you're in the presence of an animal, yes, absolutely. There's no problem. It's only another exposed human being. By the way, the whole idea of human beings requiring clothing is a very interesting concept, because it isn't simply for protection against the elements. It also has to do with allowing us to live modestly, and whether or not that may be the main reason why we wear clothing is to be able to not expose ourselves. Yes, David.
So uh, you, I agree with everything you've said, and or
Yes.
comprehend. But the one thing that I find interesting is, and I wouldn't do it, but
No.
I mean, now I'm going to try not to do it, but
Yes.
not reciting the Shema when you're naked. I mean, you would actually think that. I mean, a lot of things aside, you would actually think that would be the most appropriate moment to do something like that, because you're stripped down and your soul is bare
Yes.
in some respect. So it
Right.
kind of goes logic, you know what I mean? It just seems to go against what you would think. You would actually, I mean, if
Yeah.
you're by yourself, I'm not
Of
talking about with
course.
anybody else around. I'm just saying that if
Yes.
you're by yourself,
Right.
it would seem that would be you're the most vulnerable at that moment. That would seem to be most appropriate as opposed to least appropriate. But
Well,
anyway,
yes, so you could argue that. Okay. So again, you know, hmm, nudity. Does that have to do with a certain type of showing off? Is it a trying, in other words, the need to be nudist? What is it? What is it that would make us want to walk around naked? Okay. Is it the beauty of the human body? We know that there are bodies, the human body can be a great source of beauty. Is there something impudent about it? In being outside, especially, not being in a house, but being out in a public area or an area that is not covered, okay, and exposing yourself completely.
Yeah, yeah, that
Is
right.
that involve in other words, what are the deeper psychological issues going on there?
Yeah,
So,
that
yeah,
yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I was just thinking of the case when
yeah,
somebody's alone in their own,
yeah, of
you know,
course.
that's the circumstance. If it's even forbidden under those
It
circumstances,
is. It is. It is.
yeah, it's saying we can't pray when we're at literally the most vulnerable instant, right? Because
Right.
most people feel very vulnerable if they're not wearing clothes.
Right.
But,
So,
but anyway,
yeah.
it's just interesting. So
Right. It's interesting because you're bringing out the fact that being naked can be both a way of being shameless, okay? And on the other hand, why do you think, they would basically, put people in these prison uniforms and stuff like that, basically to humiliate them or take away their clothes? Like
yeah,
you have these pictures that from Nazi Germany, right, where they're taking men and women and basically stripping them entirely to throw
yeah,
them into the bath. And I realized they probably had pragmatic issues too, but I think it also made them feel very vulnerable.
yeah.
Makes you feel less human and more like an animal.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So
So anyway,
right. So now you're getting so Kamash. So here we are. You might wrongly think that a non-Jew or an idolater is like it can be compared to a donkey, and because there's no prohibition against saying the Shema, reciting the Shema as the example, in the presence of animals, there's no prohibition. So likewise here, if and the animals aren't wearing clothing, right? So okay. Kamash Malan is the other part of this Salkadat Achamina. In other words, I might wrongly say, Kamash Malan, for that reason, the Torah teaches us this, to take away this erroneous thought, okay? The inhunami ikru erva, that they too, that even non-Jews are also considered to be naked. They are also, have that sense, and that when they are exposed, or when they're naked, they are also considered exposed. Dichtiv. Why? Because here specifically it says the ervat avihem lor avu, and it uses this term ervat. It says the nakedness of their father they did not see, and this is prior to Abraham. These are not Bnei Yisrael, okay? This is the rest of humanity that we're talking about. So we have this, but what's so interesting though is on the one hand we have some things that are ethically, you might say, troubling. And on the other hand, we have a statement saying, hold it a second, don't dehumanize these people. They also are required to be modest. And that means they're real human beings too. Despite this verse from Ezekiel, okay, that and the truth is that we see to this day how one group of people will treat another group of people as if they're lesser human beings or not even human beings. So you got to look at the whole picture here and try to understand what it's saying. So let's get into, okay, I know it's a little late, but I want to keep going or I can stop because this is fairly long. And the next meeting we have, we should be able to do this because that's right here. And we get through pretty much a lot of this. I'm trying to see where this ends, and I think it goes on for quite a bit. Okay. So, yep, we'll take care of it next time we get together, and I will mark the spot. And it's very cool because he tries to explain how how that verse in Ezekiel might be actually applicable without necessarily, being in a sort of this globally insulting statement. So we'll save this for next time, as tempting as it is to do it now. Okay. Unless there's something for the record, I'm going to stop the recording. So I think I'm going to do that.